So here is Section 4, Analysis and Meaning Making, Part 2. And so we ended with talking about genre analysis, and now we're going to talk about other types of analysis. Then we'll end up talking about, well, we'll actually shift from qualitative, which was what we have been doing, to quantitative analysis. So with a narrative analysis, we are looking at how in the media, especially with media text, you do this. You look at storytelling, how you tell a story, how you develop a narrative. And so you look at a text and you say, okay, well, and this works especially well for visual media text, movies, television. And so you say, okay, well, how is the story in this text being told? We all kind of have evolved as humans, and our brains have evolved to kind of understand storytelling in a certain way. And there's efficient ways of understanding and telling stories. The most efficient way is to follow a linear path. You know, A happens, then B happens, then C results. And so even when we're very young, we are taught this process. You think about all the children's stories or Bible stories or nursery rhymes, fables, things like that you were told as a child. Think about Three Little Pigs and the sequence of events in there. You know, the wolf goes to the house of straw first, and then the house of sticks, and then the bricks. So there's an A, B, C, and then we end at D, kind of linear, what I'll call linear storytelling going on there. Also, there are, there are commonalities or archetypes that we use in stories, such as there's a good guy, there's a bad guy, and so that helps efficiently tell those stories, right? For lack of a better word, there's a normal way of telling the story. So a narrative analysis is looking at when you break those norms. So it's understanding a narrative conventions in which stories draw and then deconstruct those ways, and how do audiences make sense of that? How do audiences make sense of stories? So a narrative analysis is just looking at, okay, well, is the story told differently, and why is that important? Why is it important that a story is told differently, or doesn't have necessarily the same type of archetypes? Maybe there is no truly good guy in the film or truly a bad guy. So it's just looking at how storytelling can be altered and why that would be done. So you look at the structure of the plot. You look at how the normality of the plot is disrupted and then returned. And again, you have standard character types. So the little picture I have here is a picture of a jack that, like a child's toy that you would spin. This comes from the movie Inception. Inception is a very good example of narrative analysis, of disrupting a narrative. If you've never seen Inception, you need to watch it. Great movie, but I'll explain a little bit about what it is really quickly. Inception is about these characters that can invade people's dreams, and usually it's done sometimes for good reasons, but sometimes for corrupt reasons. But you invade someone else's dream, and it's usually a team of people that go in and invade this person's dream. So they have a person go to sleep, and then they have this person, which is called the architect, which basically enters that other person's dream. We'll call him the target. Enters the target's dream and starts building the world that the person is dreaming in, that the target is dreaming in. So they construct this dream reality. Of course, the dreamer never really knows that they're dreaming. They think they're in actual reality. And so you can manipulate people because of this. And that's the story of Inception. And the thing about Inception is, and the dream world, is that you think everything is real in the dream. It's not until you come out of the dream that you realize that that something wasn't right, that you were actually dreaming. But while you're asleep and dreaming, it's just like you and me. When you're asleep and you're dreaming, you're reacting as if that thing is real. So what that means is that you have someone invading a person's dream. And what you can actually do in this movie, according to this movie, is when you're in that person's dream, the target's dream, they can imagine or they can themselves inside of their dream decide that they want to sleep and dream at a sub-level. And it's, if I can try to explain this better when we see face to face, I will. But it's imagine you're dreaming, and then in your dream you have you imagine that you are dreaming again, and then within that dream you imagine you are dreaming again. So it's dreams within inside of dreams within inside of dreams within inside of dreams, and so the nature of reality becomes really distorted. And the thing with Inception is that the nature of time becomes distorted. Because it operates on this premise that, you and I can be dreaming, and it seems like we've been dreaming for an hour. And then we wake up and look at the clock, we've only been asleep for 5 minutes. And so there's this time distortion that can occur when you go into people's dreams. That's what disrupts this plot. It disrupts the plot because you're constantly going down a rabbit hole and time is slowing down. But then as you come out of the rabbit hole, time starts to speed up. So it creates this weird dynamic in the storytelling. Inception was made by Christopher Nolan. He's done other things that disrupt time and physical space in movies. For example, he's not only the director behind Inception, but he also made Interstellar, which is about space and time travel. He did Memento, which is about you're following a main character who has short-term amnesia. In other words, they can't remember anything beyond about 5-10 minutes. And so you're following that character throughout they're trying to figure out a mystery. They're trying to solve a mystery. But you're actually only seeing bits of it every 5 seconds or every 5 minutes, and then it kind of restarts and shows you what happened before that 5 minutes. So if you can imagine, you are watching a film about this mystery, but actually when you start, you're at the end. And you're working your way back. So it's like an incredibly long flashback almost. So it's a very interesting movie, but you're looking at how normality therefore gets turned on its head. And so that's part of a narrative analysis. Discourse analysis. So a discourse analysis looks at a media text, but it looks at how it uses language in that media text, right? So it analyzes broader beliefs, worldviews, social structures that's embedded in and reinforced in the use of verbal or written communication. It relies heavily on linguistics, so the study of how language is used. And one thing that I like to look at when I talk about discourse analysis in the media is looking at metaphors that are made, analogies that are made. The media creates these kind of different terms for things that maybe they're not totally accurate. And discourse analysis is really just looking at that language. What's the type of language that people use? How do they talk about something? And that's really what discourse analysis is, studying how people talk about things, right? So if you were in civics class and you were talking about immigrants coming to the country, let me see if I can clear this up a little bit. If you think about how we grew up as children and taught about Thanksgiving and discovery of the New World, and how these immigrants, these refugees, came into America because they were being persecuted. They weren't living the type of life that they wanted to live. So they come to America and they found America. And even you have the Statue of Liberty, which says, give us you're tired and you're weak and you're hungry and you're oppressed. Give us those people. And you look at how we talk about that historically, and then now in the current day, how we talk about immigration. Very different. You know, the way we talked about it in the past was with an air of respect. Today we talk about illegals, right? Commonly we don't even refer to them as immigrants. We just say illegals. Well, that's part of discourse analysis. That's part of figuring out why do we say things the way we do now. What has changed in the discourse? What has changed about talking about this issue? And we can talk about in class differences like using terminology like a death tax versus an inheritance tax, or global warming versus climate change. One of the things that I do like to show is video about the war on being used as a metaphor. And so let me, if I can end this real quick or come over. I'm sorry, I'm having to do some computer gymnastics here to try to get this thing up that I want to show you. There you go. Now you can see it, right? Okay, so what I want to discuss is we're going to talk about the war on Christmas, which is a popular phrase that people use. And I'll have you listen to this real quick.
This morning, a decision by Starbucks to use a minimalist design for its signature holiday cup is stirring up a little bit of a debate. Some evangelical Christians are very upset that the coffee giant is doing away with symbols of the season like the snowflakes, the snowmen, and the other kind of ornaments. Starbucks says this year's simple cup is inclusive. Don Daler is at New York's Bryant Park with a fight over traditional holiday symbols. Don, good morning.
Good morning. It's beginning to look a little like Christmas here in Bryant Park. The pop-up gift shops have opened up. Some decorations are going up all over the place here. But not so at any given Starbucks, where those images of Christmas trees and snowflakes have virtually disappeared. For millions of coffee drinkers, the arrival of Starbucks holiday-themed cups means Christmas is on the way.
It's huge. People who don't even go to Starbucks regularly, they come during the holidays because we have the red cups.
But some critics say the image of this year's holiday cup was like waking up to a lump of coal Christmas morning. Unlike previous years, when the cups came adorned with holiday-inspired images, ranging from snowmen to ornaments, this year's design is just a plain red cup.
It doesn't give me like the, wow, it's Christmas, you know what I mean?
The topic percolated on social media, where evangelical groups accused the company of waging a war on Christmas.
Do you realize that Starbucks wanted to take Christ and Christmas off of their brand new cups? That's why they're just plain red.
On Thursday, former pastor John Feuerstein posted this video to his Facebook page. It's now been viewed 12 million times.
When I went in and I asked for my coffee, they asked for my name, and I told them my name is Merry Christmas. So guess what? Starbucks, I tricked you into putting Merry Christmas on your cup.
In a statement issued to CBS this morning, Starbucks responded, saying, "Our core values as a company is to create a culture of belonging, inclusion, and diversity. And we will continue to embrace and welcome customers from all backgrounds and religions in our stores around the world." The so-called war on Christmas isn't confined to coffee shops. Last week, a shopping mall chain faced criticism for replacing Santa's sleigh and reindeer with a glacier-themed winter wonderland.
Where's the green? Where's the red? Where's the elves? Where's the idea of Christmas?
One man even started a Facebook page urging people to boycott the company until the old-time displays are brought back.
I think that it was the beginning of a whitewashing of the holiday season.
Company president David Contis says the new design had nothing to do with making the holiday more secular.
It was in response to trying to create a more interactive kind of modern experience for the kids, and it just didn't work.
On Sunday, the company announced a return to their traditional Christmas displays. Experts say Starbucks will stick with their minimalist design.
I'm sure in some ways they're happy about some of this attention. It It's really shining a spotlight on their brand. And the holiday season, they probably have a lot of people that are welcoming this change as well. So people will come into Starbucks and buy coffee, and maybe they'll put their hashtag on it, but they're buying a cup of coffee.
This isn't the first time Starbucks has courted controversy with their cups. Just last March, they launched the program Race Together to elicit conversations about race. That was so unpopular, it only lasted a couple days. Nora.
All right, Don, thanks. A lot of pain in the world.
I was going to say, it seems damned if you do and damned if you don't.
So, yeah, so I show that clip just to talk about how people are, they are constantly chiming in that there's a war on Christmas, that people are trying to take Christ out of Christmas, which, of course, the cups never had anything about Christianity in particular, other than maybe it did say Merry Christmas, but you saw in that report some people were saying that they were upset that they'd even taken the snowflakes and the snowman off the cup. And the media has kind of echoed again and again this this belief or this theory that people are taking Christmas out of the holidays. Now, while this is going on, let me assure you, and I'll show you right here, Starbucks is not getting rid of Christmas. In fact, Starbucks makes a blend of coffee around the holidays whose name is Christmas Blend. They specifically mention the holiday of Christmas. They've been doing that since 1984, and they do it each year. So, you know, it was a decision to change the look of the cup. They weren't making a political or a religious statement. If they were trying to make a religious statement, they would change the name of their signature holiday coffee from Christmas Blend just to the word holiday blend or something. But people want to discuss things in certain ways, right? So let me get rid of this real quick. We'll go back here, but I would also like, give me a second, I want to pull up another thing. This talking constantly about a war on and using these metaphors. It comes up again and again and again. We like to talk about warriors because we understand when in language, and this almost goes back to narrative analysis, is that we like for there to be a good guy and a bad guy. We like conflict. It's easy to tell a story about conflict. And so we'll put that metaphor of war and soldier on things. I wanted to show you this clip that is it's probably more than a decade old now, but this is another person that's using a metaphor of war and really doing it inappropriately.
Also a moment to create a little controversy in this game.
I've got to move this video down, so just give me a second here. There we go. I didn't know it would pop up off screen. But here we go. Let's move this back and I'll show you.
Also a moment to create a little controversy in this game. Kevin Winslow Jr. will throw a terrific block on Tennessee's Corey Campbell and actually gets a couple of volunteers on this play. He sort of stood over Campbell afterwards, who was injured, and after the game, the post-game media session, Winslow was asked if he realized that Campbell had been injured on the play.
Down on the...
Yeah, I don't give a hell. It's about this you, man. I don't give a flying, you know what, about a ball. I don't give a damn. He'd do the same thing to me. It's war. They don't give a freaking, you know what, about you. They will kill you. They're out there to kill you. So I'm going to kill him. You write that in the paper. You write that. You make money off that. No, man, I'm pissed. All y'all take this down. I'm pissed, man. We don't care about nobody except it's you. We don't. If I didn't hurt him, he'd hurt me. They're gunning for my legs. I'm going to come right back at him. Soldier.
So he's a soldier. He's a college football player. and he eventually was a NFL player until he decided to disobey some of his managers that told him, you don't need to be riding a motorcycle, and he hurt himself riding a motorcycle. Things did not end the way I believe he wanted them to end. But he's making these statements about being a soldier, fighting in a war. So looking at how people choose to talk about things, right? Looking at their discourse, their language, that can be analyzed and written up as an analysis. So let's shift gears here real quick and talk about quantitative analysis. Now, qualitative analysis was all about looking at something minute, studying that specific thing. It's a narrow focus. It can be polysemic, which again means it has multiple meanings. It can be subjective. The flip side of those past analyses that we were just talking about, which are qualitative, talking about semiotics and genre analysis, narrative analysis, discourse analysis, all those types of things. The flip side is quantitative analysis, where we're just going to look specifically at giving things numerical value and counting them and doing a statistical analysis, looking at frequencies or averages or things like that. It's about numbers. And so the thing about that is, when you reduce everything down to a number and put it in a category, that means that you can study a much wider field, right? So instead of studying one text, if you're going to rate things and give things numbers, now instead of looking at just one text, you can look at several different texts, okay? Proponents claim, or the people that favor this type of analysis will say that they prefer it because it seems systematic, right? It seems like if I develop all these rules for counting things, and then I count them out, and then later on I give you the rules and say, hey, will you check behind me? Will you count it out too? If they're good rules, they should come up with the same number that you did. And that's what we mean by they're systematic, they're objective. Regardless of who does it, if they follow the same steps, the same procedures, they should get the same outcome. There should be empirically verifiable results, right? Empiricism, being able to look at something and give it a quantity, say that this thing exists, using numbers to do that. This all comes out of this belief in positivism. Positivism was this movement in the social sciences when the social sciences were trying to gain credibility. Psychology, sociology, anthropology, these things were trying to be seen as just as legitimate as natural empirical science, biology, chemistry, physics, things that had formulas and things that could be reduced down to a number. You know, there's a certain number of protons in an element, a certain number of electrons and neutrons. And social science research was wanting to prove itself to the other sciences, to say, look, we can do things systematically too. We can study things systematically. And so this quantitative analysis of looking at things really develops out of that positivism, this feeling that people had that, you know, we can treat media texts as things that can be quantified, measured, that can be given some kind of numerical significance, and then we can study things as a group or study things and how they compete. So that's where we get this quantitative analysis side, and perhaps one of the most well-known quantitative methods in media analysis is a content analysis. Content analysis, it looks for broad trends. It counts the number and frequency by which something occurs in a text. So for example, if we want to look at misogynism, the treatment of women in rap music, or look at how women are portrayed misogynistically or overtly sexualized in video games. We can do that, but we have to break things into categories. What do I mean by that? Well, if we're going to say that there's a lyric in a rap song that is misogynistic, that treats women poorly, you got to come up with rules of what counts as misogynism and what doesn't count as misogynism. So you got to say, okay, well, these words are misogynistic, and the use of them will count it as a misogynistic term. But that can be subjective. We have to come together and talk and come to some agreement about those categories and terms. For example, if I say babe, well, if I'm referring to a woman and I say babe, is that, according to the relationship, is that a misogynistic term or not? Have you ever heard your parents call one another babe? And was that done misogynistically or with malice? Or are you going to take a stance that every time you use the word babe, it's demeaning? So you have to come up with those rules. And those rules have to be those rules that end up making things fit into categories. Those rules have to be exhaustive. They have to be mutually exclusive. So, and that goes for the categories, really. So, like if we say babe, then we have to know that every time we see it, we're going to put it in this box. We have to know that we're going to count it as misogynism every time. And that's what I mean by mutually exclusive. It can't, the word babe, when you're doing a content analysis, it can't be both a good word and a bad word. It has to fit into one of those groups, right? And your categories have to be exhaustive. So we're not just looking at the word babe. We may look at the word doll. We may look at, obviously the word bitch. Okay, well, is bitch always used as a negative term? Is it always meant to represent women in a poor light? Let's think of all the other words that someone could use. That's what we mean by exhaustive. You have to come up with all the different scenarios and think about it, prior to your study. What are some words that are going to pop up in these rap songs that are misogynistic? Let's make sure we have a complete list. You don't want anything to pop up when someone say, well, we never talked about where that would go. So you need these categories to be exhaustive and mutually exclusive. Population and sample matter. So again, if we're talking about misogynism in rap music, well, which rap songs are you talking about? How many rap songs are you talking about? What's the period of time that you're looking over? Are you going to look at all rap songs that were ever hits since the mid-'80s? That's a lot of stuff to look at. And so you have to determine what's my population, what's my sample. What am I trying to look at range-wise? What range is appropriate? And how do I pull songs? How do I decide on a sample, right? Because if you do want to look at how misogynism in rap music has progressed over 30, 40 years, you got to decide how you're going to do that and make it manageable. So let's say maybe you say, okay, well, we're only going to pick the top 10 rap songs of that year and go forward. That's still going to give you a huge population. All right, so we pick the top 5 rap songs every year going back to the 80s. Okay, and we'll look in Billboard magazine and how they rank, and we'll take the top 5 from every year and just move forward. Okay, well, that gives you a big range, and that gives you a sample. Now, we can still argue, is that an appropriate sample or not? Because maybe there were some rap songs that were really misogynistic, and they didn't necessarily sell well in the record store, but yet everyone had a copy of it, or everyone knew what we were talking about. So, then you can start to question whether your sample is valid or not. so you have to figure out what you're looking for and how broadly you're going to go. Coding is important as well. You have to determine if something fits into your prescribed category. The other thing is you need to have multiple coders, right? Because if I'm looking at something and coding it, in other words, I'm saying, yes, this is bad, yes, this is good, and I'm coming up with those decisions. If it's just me doing that, then no one is going to question behind me until I'm done with the study, right? But if I can take these little rules that I have, here's the rules that tell you when a word is misogynistic and when it's not. If I have those rules, then I should be able to give those rules to any other person. And if they're good rules, hopefully the number of times I find a misogynistic word, that'll be the same number of times the other person did. And so sometimes we call this intercoder reliability, meaning that, okay, if I took our group of songs and I split them up, but there's some songs that are going to be coded by both me and another person. In other words, we want to compare them later. So let's say I take a rap song, and I'm coding it, but we also let two other people do two other analyses and code the same song. So now we've got three coders, me and two other people. We've looked at the same song. When we tried to code and we tried to count it, when we counted all of the misogynistic words in that song, did we get the same number, right? Typically you're not going to get the exact same number. So you look at a percentage of the time did you find the same things, and we call that a intercoder reliability rate. And usually what you're looking for is about 80%. Did you agree? Did all three of you agree at least 80% of the time? Yes. Okay, well then it seems like your rules are made so that they're easy enough to follow for anybody. Okay, doesn't necessarily mean that your rules are always correct or that your rules are always exhaustive, but it does mean that according to your rules, other people can use those to come up with similar results, right? So you want to have multiple coders just so that you know you have clear rules to follow. And this is the last slide. So content analysis also has its problems, right? Because even though, like I just said, maybe you have 3 coders, 4 coders, 5 coders. That's great. But at the end of the day, remember, they're trying to agree with you according to your rules, which means it all still relies on one person or one group's human judgment, right? If I say, no, babe is always going to be a demeaning word, then these other people, yeah, sure, they're going to count it every time it shows up. But someone may come to me later and say, well, actually, I don't think babe always has to be a demeaning word. And now you have to explain yourself. Well, why did you decide that? And as systematic and as nice and categorical and exhaustive and all that, as nice as that is, maybe your initial judgment on making that a bad word, maybe that was flawed. And so you still, even though you're trying to make it systematic and empirical, it still all relies on a human's judgment, right? The person still has to determine categories. So it may not be as systematic as you think. And one of the things that I'll leave you with is think about violence. We study violence in the media all the time, and there's several content analyses that have been done on violence. Well, what do you call violence? Because in television, I can point you to studies at the birth of television that were looking at TV violence and claim that things like a clown putting a pie in someone else's face was a violent act. I can show you the early days of video games, and when they were doing violent stories or violent studies on video games, they would count Pac-Man as a violent game, Mario Brothers as a violent game. Those are not the standards that we hold today. We would not necessarily say that putting a pie in someone's face was a violent act. We would not say that Pac-Man is a violent game compared to what we do today. So these things can shift and change. They're not as systematic as one would think. So we'll end there. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in class.